Hi, and welcome to the Carbon Reduction Challenge Summer 2020. My name is Dr. Beril Toktay. I'm a faculty member in the Scheller College of Business at Georgia Tech, and I co-direct the Carbon Reduction Challenge program with my colleague, Dr. Kim Cobb. I'm very excited to welcome you to the Summer 2020 version of this challenge, where we're focusing on COVID impacts and what it is that we can learn through this, shock to the system and changes that have happened that we would like to maintain after the pandemic is over in such a way that we reduce carbon emissions, we save money, and we accrue some other co-benefits. In this video, I'll be talking about making the business case for your project. In other words, making the financial calculations that show what the benefit of undertaking this project are for your organization. This is particularly important if you are working in a for-profit company, but in any organization, people care about the numbers. So this is going to be important no matter what. Before I jump into the details of this, I just want to share with you that there are many companies that have already made commitments to carbon neutrality. This is true in the world, this is true in the US, it's also true in Georgia. For example, Delta has a commitment to carbon neutrality, and they recently announced I think $1 billion or maybe even $10 billion decarbonization fund that they're going to use towards this. Cox Enterprises has a commitment to be carbon neutral by 2044. Georgia Power has made some aggressive commitments, and Interface, a local carpet company, has even pledged to become carbon negative by 2040. That is, to draw more carbon into their products than they put out through their emissions in their operations and production processes, which is incredibly ambitious. So just to say that there's a lot of interest in various organizations about how to make this happen. But of course, everybody cares to make it happen in such a way that it also helps the bottom line. And that's where making the business case comes in. Now, depending on what kind of project you're doing, the approach is going to be slightly different. So I want to highlight the 4 categories where typically your project would fall. One might be changes in collective behavior in the employee base. And these personal behaviors, in some cases, might relate directly to work, such as telecommuting, reducing the amount of air travel, or it might be a personal choice, such as not eating red meat or doing the cool wash cycle at home. By the way, these are things you can do too. Another category is what we call no-cost modifications. Now, there'll always be some cost because people have to spend time to evaluate the project, and that's still a resource that the company uses. But these are projects where there isn't a need for a big capital investment. For example, if you change the lighting schedule such that all lights go off 30 minutes earlier, there's no need for a big upfront investment. Or you might change the default car rental option from mid-size to economy, which, by the way, is a winning project from a past year. A third category is making infrastructure changes, such as installing a cool roof, buying recycling equipment, making changes to the lighting to have more energy efficient lighting. Now, in some organizations, because right now the operations have been ramped down, they may view this as a good time to invest in such projects that normally would be disruptive. And then the fourth category, which is a little bit more subtle, is making changes to the business model or to the operations. For example, if a company were to sell more fountain drinks instead of single-use packaged drinks, then this would have a transport emissions impact, and it would also have a emissions reduction from packaging impact. If a restaurant were to change its restaurant menu to have meatless Mondays, that would be a business model change that has a carbon emissions implication. If a company, say Amazon, were to incentivize more customers to forego the 1-day delivery and go to 5-day delivery, that's going to have a positive benefit. So what we think is that, and where we're directing you this summer, is to focus primarily on categories 1 and 4. But I want to put all of them here so that you have a big picture in mind and that you're not limited in your thinking necessarily. So jumping into making the business case. What we're asking you to do is to quantify the financial benefit of your project along these 3 dimensions. One is calculating the net present value of the project. The second, its payback period. And the third, its return on investment. As I'll explain later, for the no-cost project implementations where there isn't an upfront cost, then the only thing you can do is calculate net present value. But for all other projects, we will ask you to do all 3. In many cases, there's going to be co-benefits that go beyond direct financial impacts from the project. For example, if employees become more productive as a result of your project, that's going to have bottom line benefits. If the company is able to retain employees longer, good employees longer, that's going to have a positive impact on its bottom line. When you go outside the 4 walls of the company, you might look at the community and see if this project would result in better community relations. That would be a co-benefit. For example, suppose that the company invests in a community solar project or in a tree planting project. Those might be examples of that bullet. Again, outside the 4 walls, look at the customers. Is this project one that might improve the company's brand recognition or customer loyalty, which would have longer-term impacts in terms of market share and revenue? So what we're asking you to do is to quantify the financial benefits, but also think about what are some of these co-benefits that are a bit more indirect, that you might not be able to quantify, but still do talk about them in making the business case. So to go over these approaches, I have selected a pretty simple example, LED retrofit. So imagine that you're changing 500 fixtures, $700 each. This will be an electricity saving of 665,000 kilowatt hours per year. That the price purchase electricity is 15 cents per kilowatt hour, and that the project life is 10 years. In other words, those fixtures are going to function for 10 years before you have to replace them again. So with that, let's look at NPV. What is NPV? Well, it's the lifetime value of the project in today's dollars. So when we talk about today's dollars, that means we're discounting future cash flows, right? Then the question comes up, what discount rate should I use? Well, a conservative approach would be to use the rate of inflation. Another approach would be to use what is called the internal return rate target, or the hurdle rate, which is the opportunity cost of money for that company. So what does that mean? Suppose that I have $50,000 I'm going to use for the retrofit project. Well, maybe I could have used those $50,000 to have a customer advertising project. And I calculate that that project has, through increased revenues, a 25% return on investment. If I don't use those $50,000 there, but I use it for the LED project, then the question that management is going to ask me, well, does the LED project have a 25% rate on investment? So where should I put my money, one or the other? Typically the one with the higher opportunity cost of money or higher return rate is going to win. So most companies have an internal target above which you must fall for that project to be considered for investment. Okay? So when you calculate the NPV, if it's 0, that means that the project breaks even at your chosen discount rate. And conversely, you can calculate the internal return rate of the project. This is the discount rate at which the project breaks even. Okay? So suppose that you calculate that the discount rate at which the project breaks even is 12%, but your company's IRR target is 15%, well, that project is going to have a hard time getting approved. Right? So that's why these matter. So how can you calculate the NPV? Well, you can use Excel. You can use the present value formula where you enter the interest rate, the duration of the project, and the yearly savings. You need to add a negative sign before PV because somehow Excel switches the sign automatically. And then from this, you subtract the initial investment, and that gives you the net present value. So suppose that we use inflation at 3% as the discount rate for the LED project. We already said that the lifetime of those bulbs is going to be 10 years, so put in 10 for years. And then the annual savings we calculate to be 99,750. You subtract the initial investment and you end up with a $500,000 net present value. So in this case, if you in Excel play around with the 3%, keep increasing it, you'll find that at 25.58%, the NPV hits 0. So this is the internal return rate of this project. And this is a very good number. It would clear the hurdle rate or the IRR target of most companies. Okay, so play around with that. The payback period basically answers the question, in how many years will I be recovering my initial investment using just the savings from that project? So to calculate the simple payback period, all you do is divide the initial investment by the yearly savings. So you end up with 3.5 years in this case. Finally, the return on investment is the dollars obtained per dollar invested, typically per year. So for example, if you make $100,000 investment and you obtain 20K a year on that, the ROI is set to be 20,000. So for an energy savings project, you're dividing the yearly savings by the total cost and multiply by 100. That gives you the ROI in terms of percentage. So for our project, you end up with an ROI of 28.5. All right, so that's pretty easy, right? If you put it all together, what we conclude here is that the LED retrofit is a financially pretty attractive project, and it has this financial profile, $500,000 NPV, payback period of 3.5 years, and a return on investment of 28.5. So for projects with an initial investment, we expect you to calculate all three and present all three when you're writing up your projects. Where there is no initial investment, such as a lighting schedule change, car rental change, and all that, because you don't have the initial investment, then the payback period and the return on investment don't apply. What you would be calculating in such a project is simply the net present value. And for the LED retrofit, if we're to think about co-benefits, we can see that because there is less heat given off by LEDs, you'll have a decrease in temperature in the areas where they're used, and therefore there'll be a reduced AC need as well. The lighting might get better, which might translate to increased productivity. And then, because LEDs last much longer than, say, incandescents, you're also going to have reduced end-of-life waste. So all of those are co-benefits of the LED project that you might come up with, and maybe you come up with others. Some things for you to consider. You're always going to need an expected timeline of the improvement to calculate the NPV, because you're doing the NPV over a particular length of time. When you're calculating the financials, make sure that you think through all the major cost categories. So think about, what's the cost of new materials? What's the cost to install? Are there any additional costs? In the LED example that I gave here, what we did not consider, but perhaps we should have considered, is as you're replacing LEDs, you end up with incandescents that you have to dispose of. And that will have a cost, right? So you might have wanted to consider that in this particular project. And then you want to make sure that you're comparing apples and apples. Again, for example, if we're thinking about replacing incandescents with LEDs, we have to realize that the length of time for which we can use LEDs is much longer than incandescents. 30,000 versus 2,500 hours. So you install LEDs once and get 30,000 hours out of them. For that same amount of use, you would have had to replace your incandescents 12 times, right? So make sure that if you have a comparison, you calculate the cost of 12 incandescent light bulb changes to one LED installation, right? So compare apples with apples. I want to end with two examples from past projects. In the first project, the scope was, or the proposal was to turn lights off 30 minutes earlier at the end of the day at a 45-floor BP building. This is a no-cost modification project type. Right? So our students calculated that we'd have 360,000 pounds of carbon dioxide emissions reduction per year. Initial investment cost zero, it's just a schedule change. Annual estimated savings 24,600. And let's imagine that the building lease duration is 20 years and that you continue this project for 20 years. In that case, the net present value of this project is going to be $366,000. You're not going to calculate ROI or payback period because there isn't an initial investment cost. And in terms of co-benefits, you have increased fixture life and reduced labor and waste that comes from that. Here's another example. This was a cool roof installation on the Sustainable Education Building at Georgia Tech. This is an infrastructure project type, and it does require an upfront investment cost. In this case, $49,000. The annual estimated savings were $5,100 per year. So let's use a 3% discount rate, and let's imagine that the roof life is 20 years. In that case, you end up with a net present value of almost $27,000. The payback period is 9.6 years, which is good. It's less than the lifetime of the roof, right? So you can then, for 10.4 years, keep getting benefits from that roof that puts you more and more in the positive from having made that initial investment. And the return on investment here is 10.4%. In terms of co-benefits, this translates to reduced heat islands on our campus. So I hope that the information about making the business case and these examples were useful to you. And I hope that you really enjoy your project. We're all here as a resource for you at any time. Thank you.